So I got the chance to be the personal assistant to H.N. Swanson, Harold Norling Swanson, who was a longtime literary agent who was 87 years old when I bumped into him on his two-story walk-up in Sunset Boulevard in 1987, in the fall of 1987. He was just turning 88 years old. Swanee had represented some of the great authors of the 1930s and 1940s, um, Cornell Woolrich, Raymond Chandler, James N. Cain, John O'Hara, Pearl Buck, and he stayed put on Sunset Boulevard and outlived, all of his clients. And so by the time I met him, he had just a couple of literary estates and two or three living contemporary writers, one of whom was Elmore Leonard. So I was introduced to the idea of Elmore because I had never read him or met him. Um, when Elmore came in, he picked up kind of quickly that he had great loyalty and affection to Swanee, but Swanee, now 88 years old, was missing kind of the speed and youth to meet all the moments of being a Hollywood agent that Elmore wanted. And he felt that my presence would be helpful, and he welcomed me in to be part of his working team. And that became pretty quickly the reality of me being his primary agent, realistically, with Swanee's advanced age. But we shared a great affection for Swanee, who was a wonderful character, and we adored his presence. But then I had to then jump in and figure out how do I help place Elmore's books to Hollywood and help work on his publishing deals. And I was only 27, 28 years old, but Swanee was incredibly generous and said, you can do this. And I looked at some of the recent films that were not that wonderful, like 52 Pickup, which wasn't terrible, but Cat Chaser, some of the ones that were more recent. And I said, what if we try to make one really great one? And he said, that would be wonderful. And so I had the chance to see an early screening of Reservoir Dogs that Quentin Tarantino directed because I was friendly with Lawrence Bender as producer. And it was from Swanee's office that I sent the galley of Jackie Brown of Rum Punch to Lawrence Bender so that he would give it to Quentin Tarantino to read after I saw the screening of Reservoir Dogs, feeling like the quality of the dialogue and the way people talked and the way that a story moved felt like kindred to Elmore. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if this young director would take a look at a whole generational, not knowing that Quentin was a fan of Elmore's. So I gave the manuscript, sent it to Lawrence, and he sent it right back with a buck slip saying, Quentin does his own stuff. And I thought, okay. And then like 2 days later, Lawrence Bender called me and said, hey, can you send that manuscript back? I didn't realize that Quentin is a big fan of Elmore Leonard's. He wants to read it. And that's how the connection was made to Quentin, which led to him taking it on and adapting it and finally producing it as Jackie Brown. Prior to that movie getting produced, Quentin played an instrumental role in helping the other project that I had helped set up, which was Get Shorty, with the producer Barry Sonnenfeld and Stacy Scher and Stacy's partner at Jersey. We had the irony of this, the path of Get Shorty was that it had been turned down by every studio, and like the last studio that was left to pick it up was MGM, and they got the screenplay that was that they worked on with Scott Frank and went to every actor that could be conceived to play Chili Palmer, the title role, and couldn't land it. And the last actor on the list was John Travolta, and John Travolta had finished shooting Pulp Fiction, but that movie hadn't come out yet. So Travolta was interested, but was going to pass for whatever reasons on doing it. And it was Quentin who told Travolta, no, this is one you say yes to. So Quentin not only produced Jackie Brown, directed Jackie Brown, but he helped convince Travolta to stay on board, Get Shorty. So those two films getting made in a short time span transformed Elmore's profile to the contemporary audience. And we followed up soon thereafter with Out of Sight. I love it when at the time when Travolta had not yet come out with when Pulp Fiction not yet been released, they were a little squeamish about saying who they got for Chili Palmer because Elmore had imagined either Robert De Niro or Ray Liotta to be Chili Palmer, and
And
he
he
said,
was
"If
and
Elmore,
he was turned off by the talking baby movies that
well,
Travolta
that's it.
had made.
Well, he was well, Elmore's very generous, and I said, "Get okay, we finally got our Chili Palmer. You know who it is? It's John Travolta." He said, "Oh, you mean the guy from Look Who's Talking Too?" But he said, he goes, "Look, we're hearing he's going to be really terrific. They're saying trust this. He's going to be really terrific in this film that's about to come out uh, called Pulp Fiction, and they think he's going to be great." And Elmore's like, "All right, I'm game." And it was always Elmore, always almost. I mean, he had a strong opinion, but he would generally would take the open, generous point of view if it was available, and that was an example of that. Like he was not he was funny and flippant about his reference of who Travolta was, but he also didn't say no friggin' way am I going to let that guy. He was like very let's see it, let's see what he can do. It's Chili Palmer, but the the trio of Get Shorty, Jackie Brown, and then Out of Sight was unexpected in terms of the role of popularity. And Elmore was so sweet. It was at the premiere of the first one of those that was released was Get Shorty. And I sat with him at the Man Chinese at the premiere. He was wearing like a turquoise blue J. Crew sweater at the premiere. It was like not as he wasn't trying to be, a hipster. And we were sitting down, sitting in our seats, and there was the opening credits and just the vibe of the first 10 minutes. And he turns to me in the movie theater, quietly leans over and says, "I'm hot." And he knew it wasn't vanity. He understood that this movie was going to elevate his profile, and it did in a significant way. And the fun I had and the honor I had to sort of have him come through Hollywood and see the affection that people had for him and the folks that wanted to, have a little time with him that came from all places. Um, and the ease with which he wore it, it was so sweet and deserving.
You told
Uh,
me one time, you said that he was box office poison after Stick, and that
oh
because
yeah, I like this one. You're right. There's a great way of capturing it, which is when I got the manuscript of Get Shorty, I was reading it. I remember reading it it was like a box from, the Kinkos that would come in. He would send it. And I was reading the pages on my dining room table. And I rarely laugh out loud when reading. I mean, I don't even remember, except reading Get Shorty, was a belly ache for me. There were scenes that were just so he captured the essence of like this crazy town so beautifully. And I thought it was so inventive. And I was just overwhelmed with what a great story this would be and how clearly this would be a movie, an entertaining movie. It was so self-evident. And then I started to make the submissions and I got pass after pass after pass. I remember like 85 submissions, all passes. Eventually, Mark Rosenberg, a very good producer, said he wanted to try to do it, and he got a wonderful director, Neil Jordan, attached. And he went around town, and the studios all passed. They just thought it was, why would people in Peoria care this much about a Hollywood, how a movie gets made? It didn't seem like a popular movie idea. It just was too inside Hollywood. And so I was left with a shock of no deal, no sale, 100 passes. And I remember I was talking, I'll leave her out, but ended up being a very successful producer, studio executive. Um, and I was baffled. And she said, look, Elmore had his decade. And I remember thinking back on which decade? He had the 50s. He had the biggest stars of Hollywood in the 50s, Randolph Scott and Glenn Ford. And he had the 60s, Paul Newman and Burt Lancaster. He had the 70s, Ryan O'Neal and Burt Reynolds. He had which decade? What do you mean he had his decade? He had 3 decades at least. And he's still working. What do you mean he had his decade? But they were saying he's over. He had his run. He had a good run, and it's now someone else's turn, not Elmore's turn to be making books into movies. And it was kind of devastating at the time. And then we got the last studio that didn't know everybody else had passed MGM to acquire the rights to get Shorty for Barry Sonnenfeld. I mean, for Danny DeVito, actually,
Right.
with,
Jersey.
with Barry Sonnenfeld in mind. And they were they were able to develop it, but after the script came in, it wasn't looking like the movie was going to get made, and they couldn't get a Chili Palmer. And like the last actor on the list was John Travolta, before he had come out with Pulp Fiction, it seemed like a not such a distinctive performer to come into the story world of Elmore Leonard for Chili Palmer at the time. But Elmore was very gracious about welcoming it. And then it became kind of such a cultural moment when Get Shorty was released. So Elmore had this uh, wonderful, additional decade, which then became 3 more decades because then it didn't stop, and he had Justified the TV series, and it became, I said he's like Tony Bennett or something. He just didn't stop. And the more decades he had, the more affection and love there was for this remarkable American great artist who brought so much to so many people, both in the books and in the movies, that he just compounded the affection that people had over the years. And it was a real pleasure to see him have that additional run at success, which he so deserved. And he wore it so beautifully with just no vanity, but he enjoyed it.
Well, those big three movies, Get Shorty, Jackie Brown, which came out next, and then Out of Sight. That that like three-peat was never repeated. I know that we had, the Coen brothers and Cuba Libre that never happened. Was Jim Ul's Pagan Babies, which almost happened. And then Kathy Bates was going to do Pagan Babies, and then of course we worked together on the locations of Tishomingo Blues, and that
Don
unfortunately,
Cheadle. Yeah, that was so
yeah,
close. He was
yeah,
running the table. He was really almost like running the tables. I thought all of his books would be turned into movies at that point. It seemed like they were all happening. The kernels were in the oil and they were popping. So we pulled off a lot, but yeah, that was the three-peat that was never repeated. But then Justified, I think, became the great
that
additional story.
that's the other bookend.
Oh, well, there's two turns I think that really are remarkable with Elmore. The first was after Swanee passed away, and I was still, pretty new at this profession and wanting to proceed to have my own clients, hoping Elmore would stay with me after Swanee died, but presuming the only version of my representing him would be in Hollywood, and that he would, of course, get some top New York literary agent to handle his book publishing. So I said, Elmore, I'm going off on my own, and I really hope you would come with me with my new agency. And of course, if you want any help with getting a new publishing agent, I can help you with that. Not that you need my help, but I'd be happy to help with that. He goes, you mean you're firing me as a publishing client? I said, I'm not firing you. I figure you want someone that really knows what they're doing, that knows this stuff. They're in New York. I don't have a lot of author clients in publishing. I'm mostly the movie guy because I want to make sure you do it. You're well served. That, of course you want to be well represented. He goes, it's not that hard. He goes, you just ask for the amount of money I got last time or a little more and give them all the foreign rights so you don't have to worry about that. And then you're done. And I'm like, are you kidding? You're letting me, do you realize this is going to cover my overhead? It's like I was 29 years old or 30 years old. I'm going to start out my new agency. My making your publishing deals, the commission on that is going to allow me to afford to, already be in profit as an agency. You're gifting me that. He goes, oh yeah, no, it's not that hard. That's all you need to do. I'm sure you can handle it. I don't want to go have another agent. So it was incredibly generous. No one else would have done that. They all would have left, at that point, the young guy that doesn't know New York that well. Oh, so the other move I had was, so after working as a literary agent, making lots of movie deals for authors with a lot of established, accomplished literary authors, people included uh, young authors like David Foster Wallace and Michael Cunningham and um, established writers that I got to work with from John le Carre to Larry McMurtry. I made a pivot where I was going to focus my work on children's authors and animation. And I wanted to give Elmore a heads up because was going to be doing some rebranding of my agency to be focused in that area. And I wanted to make sure he was okay with that. And he said, and I was just not expecting him to change the way he writes, and even for a second. And he says, you mean you're thinking maybe I should write a children's book? I said, no, I'm just saying I'm going to be focused in children's authors, illustrators, and animation. I hope that's okay for you, remaining my client in an agency that's leaning in that direction. He goes, I've been thinking about writing a kid's book. One of my favorite moments of Elmore's kind of humility, he was so self-assured and so confident in what he did, but he brought a humility to it and a grace was when he was on Charlie Rose the same time with Martin Amis. And he had that exchange where Martin Amis was speaking to Charlie Rose, and um, he said something that Charlie mentioned that Martin was sharing that he was got to meet you before and he's very fond of your work. And Elmore said, Martin Amis, he's a real writer. And Charlie goes, what do you mean he's a real writer? And Elmer goes, well, he can use all the words. I only have a limited amount of words that I can put to work and I do the best I can with them. But Martin Amis could pull all the words from the language. He's a real writer. And then they brought out Martin Amis to join him which was unscripted. And he said, why don't we bring Martin out? And he said, Charlie said, Martin, did you hear what Elmore said about you? He said, I did, and my heart soared like a hawk.
That's right.
And Elmore goes, see what I mean? But Elmore was very humble, but incredibly confident in he was doing what he needed to do, what he liked doing, what he enjoyed doing. He had no pretense, but he was beloved by the great writers who, as Martin said, I can't do what he does. And he goes, what's that? He goes, he writes immensely rereadable fiction. He goes, people are working to finish through my work one time and then they're done. They're not going back to reread my work. Elmore, you pick it up again and you have fun again. He goes, I envy that. I would love to be able to pull that off. I don't know how he does it. He was an original. And everybody was in his wake. And the great writers saw that. They heard it in his ear, and they really envied him for what he accomplished as a writer. Elmore was not had no he liked hearing that, but he didn't he had no sense of being full of himself. One of the favorite stories I love, he tells is the story of when he saw Ryan O'Neal's movie in The Big Bounce,
Yeah.
and he went to the movie theater, and it was hardly anyone in the theater. In fact, he felt like he was almost alone in the theater, but a couple came and sat 2 rows in front of him. And after 15 minutes, the guy said to the girl, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen." And he says, and the three of us got up and left. And he said, I used to say that was the second worst movie ever made. And then he didn't really know what the first one was, but he figured something had to be worse. And he finally discovered it is when they remade The Big Bounce. He
And,
said, I finally figured out the worst movie ever made was waiting to be made. It was worse
yeah,
than
but
the
didn't you get like 100 grand out of Steve Bing for him to switch around a few commas? And Bing actually apologized to him for the movie, I think.
Bing was very generous. He didn't owe Elmore anything for the
Anything.
rights. And I called a young man, a producer who was working with Morgan Sackett, who was working with Steve, and said, "Hey, you think Steve would be willing to include Elmore in some consulting or something?" And Steve Bean goes, "What would feel right? How would $100,000 seem okay for that? I would like to give him something." And he said, "We said sure." And Elmore's like, I just got $100,000 for not doing anything." I said, "Yeah." And then they were going to invite him to be in the scene in the poker game that they shot in Hawaii, but he couldn't quite make the trip. But Steve Bing was very gracious, and at the premiere, he leaned in. It was a fun party, but he said, "Sorry, we fucked it up." To Elmore. Easier to misfire on a movie it is to make a good one by a long shot. And so he had a string of some good ones. Some that were almost and some that missed. I mean, Be Cool felt like it was going to be a good one. Um, he had the chance of two different directors. Um, the other one was going to be was Stephen Frears who wanted to do it, but um, he had a chance to meet F. Gary Gray on the first day of shooting, and the F. Gary Gray asked Elmore, any advice as we're starting to work on your film? He said, just remember, they don't know they're in a comedy. He goes, what? Your actors, they shouldn't know that they're in a comedy. It could be funny, but they're not playing for the laughs. And I think he kind of hit the right note with that advice. It's sort of hard to pull off, and some of them come close, but just Be Cool is one that had a lot of good elements, but couldn't quite sail. Scott Frank was remarkable in that, at first he used a highlighter to go through the novel Get Shorty to figure out what goes in the script. And it's like he showed me the highlighted book, and it's like, 3/4 of the book was highlighted. I go, I didn't understand how talented Scott Frank was at that time because I was new at this. I thought, this is easy. I got a highlighter. I could highlight Elmore's book and call myself a screenwriter. But Scott could see what was great and what was essential and what was missing for the movie. And he came to Elmore and said, this ending, it's not going to fly for the audience. You can't have, after 100 minutes of us getting to know these two, have her take him down and send him to prison like that. It's not going to
Oh, you're
feel
jumping over to out of sight now. I mean,
and
so
out of sight.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, but on Get Shorty, I moved from Get Shorty to out of sight. Scott, but point being, Scott with Get Shorty as well, he was master at adapting Elmore, and he understood first the devotion to appreciating what Elmore did in the book and how great the work was. And so he started with too much material, and then he sorted through that to figure out what the screenplay needed. And he found his way to whittle to that as a screenwriter that understood the pace and the demands of a screenplay and a movie audience. So Scott was the master at the Elmore Leonard adaptations. He did both Get Shorty and Out of Sight. It was interesting the exchange that Scott had with Elmore. Oh, at that point, you're right. By the second time, Scott took a little more bold steps as needing to depart from the book where it needed to happen. And he brought it, but he respected Elmore. And he wanted to give him a heads up of what he was going to do to change the ending. And Elmore was really gracious, but he did say, I don't see why you need to do that. I don't see why you need to change that ending. That seemed authentic. What the characters would do is what I did in the book. What you're suggesting seems kind of Hollywood. And Scott said, yeah, and I'm working in Hollywood. They need, after getting invested in these two characters, they need some way to see that there is more going on between them than just I'm doing my job and I got to take you down. It's not going to fly. It's going to be disappointing. And Elmore's like, I don't think you need to schmaltz it up or sentimentalize it. And Scott said, I got to go with this. I really think it's what's needed. And when Elmore saw the movie, he's like, you were so right. When I went on my own after Burlstein Gray, I called him up. This was in 2000, 2001, to give him a heads up that I was going to get more involved in children's books and animation. I hoped that wouldn't bother him as my emphasis was moving in that direction at that point. And he said, I could write a kid's book. And I said, I'm not expecting you to write a kid's book. He goes, no, I kind of been wanting to do one. And then he goes, what were you telling me about your dog that went in the backyard and got attacked by coyotes? He goes, can I borrow that? I think I could put that to work. And he, of course, in his own amazing way, he could take whatever in front of him and turn it into something magnificent. And he transformed it into a coyotes in the house. Um, but we continued. It was in that period that I really was looking back now at an amazing long career and so much affection and gratitude to him that I wanted to try to have him celebrated in different ways. And I worked with Greg Sutter on organizing a tribute for his 75th birthday. And we had a big gathering in Hollywood for that, which was really a great fun. And then I called up Tom Luddy, who ran the Telluride Film Festival, and said, how about a tribute to Elmore Leonard? I came up with an American original, and we'll get Coca-Cola to pay for it. Well, we never got Coca-Cola to pay for it, but they did the tribute at Telluride and he got to come and be honored. And that was part of, kind of winding up Elmore's career. But he had many more runs on around the lap still to make, and he continued to write incredible books and got the attention of Hollywood. And he wrote a novella, a short piece of fiction called Fire in the Hole that springboarded the series Justified that Graham Yost did, and that he was so happy with that captured his voice and his characters and made it a popular success, which really always made him happy to have that kind of wider audience. So the thrill of Elmore getting to do what he wanted to do, write the books he wanted to write, and that they found their way every now and then to some really unexpected, surprising, and um, and positive film treatment, was a great thrill for Elmore and one of the great honors of my professional career for sure. And what a gem of a person who every day lived such a fluid way of meeting his work and enjoying his life. And it was an inspiration to see someone working so beautifully in the zone with doing what they wanted to do and having such pleasure in their work. And I'm always grateful for Elmore's generosity to let me be near him and to be a part of his incredible path that he blazed. And everybody who's worked with Elmore and has gotten to know him has loved him. And so it's great to see that he's being celebrated on his 100th birthday. I wished he was here with us, but this is the best we can do. And I'm happy to be remembering him with such deep affection that goes beyond anything I've said here today. And always happy to go back in and share more when given the chance.